Hello, I'm Chris Moon, a fellow artist manager, and I will be your guide through tough love, adventures in artist management. Today we continue our series on pivots, chatting with managers who have, at one point or another during their career, veered into and out of artist management, and how those experiences as an artist manager speak to the work they're doing now. When I was brainstorming on a new series topic, my guest today, Caren Kelleher, was towards the top of the list of folks that I wanted to chat with, as she's reinvented herself a few times in her career. And as our conversation reveals, her passion for supporting artists is a constant throughout. Today, Caren owns and operates one of the nation's leading vinyl pressing plants, Gold Rush Vinyl, which is based in Austin, Texas. We chat about how she got there, along with all the various twists and turns in that journey. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Caren.
I'm Caren Kelleher. I'm the founder and president of Gold Rush Vinyl, which is Austin's record manufacturing plant. And the only reason I got into vinyl, honestly, was from band management. My sister and I had a boutique management company, aptly called Sister Management, and we had the pleasure of managing artists like The Lighthouse and the Whaler, The Family Crest, and Maddie Sipes and the Painted Blue.
Awesome. Well, thank you for taking the time to chat today.
Oh, I'm so happy to connect with you, Chris.
Yeah, it's good to catch up. It's been too long. But one of the things I love about doing these or having these conversations in particular is just to get a broader sense of a history of each individual. Because, I mean, we all have our separate paths in this industry that kind of lead us in and often out of management. So, and yours in particular, I think is really fascinating and very unique. Take us back to the beginning. Like, what point would you qualify your first experience in the music industry?
I always, as a kid, wanted to work in the music industry. I remember I was a kid from the 80s. So Gem and the Holograms showed me wow, the music industry, what is this? Even in cartoon format, I loved that show. My parents, it's so funny, they brought that up, that was the only cartoon I liked watching. So they had an inkling I was going to work in the music industry one day.
That's awesome.
I really, in college, I didn't really like college very much. I always wanted to work. I was so hungry to get internships and started to navigate into music industry opportunities. I got to go intern at MTV, realized I didn't really like big conglomerate, manufactured pop, and had a chance to intern at Paste Magazine. Which was, just starting up at that time. And that felt like the first instance where I was like, wow, I really could have a music industry career. But, I think like so many of us that become band managers, I was always the one making mixtapes and, CD playlists for people, helping my friends find the next new thing. I took a lot of pride in that. I had so much fun digging through music and trying to figure out what was going to be a hit or not. So it just has always felt kind of like a natural thing I wanted to do.
Yeah, when I think back about those early days at Paste, and obviously you're a big part of all that, it's a great breeding ground for a manager, because Paste at that time, in my eyes, from the very beginning, was always about looking forward and looking ahead at what's to come. And that's just such an important element of finding artists in the first place on the management side.
It was. And that time at Paste is the first really I understood what the day-to-day of a manager is. And it was working with managers like you and seeing, okay, who's on the team, right? Because the very first job I had at Paste was sorting the CD submissions that would come in and starting to understand, okay, these publicity teams usually are attached to projects that get covered in the magazine, or these managers, and just starting to understand what a team looks like for an artist and the behind the scenes pieces of it. But the more and more I got to interact with managers and see, everything from the A&R they were doing up to, developing these huge, opportunities for their clients, it just felt really cool. And it was actually at Paste that I kind of got my first taste of anything management related, and it was working with Manchester Orchestra, who were originally signed. Yeah, they were originally signed to Paste's record label, which was, Paste had so much going on back then, but their first EP came out through Paste, and Andy and Jeremiah and the guys in the band invited me to help them build a street team, when they were still being managed by Joe Kirk. And it was fun to kind of be on the ground level of that and to get the excitement of watching a band get bigger and bigger and the rooms get bigger and bigger and figuring out the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah, I'd forgotten about that element of Paste history, and I didn't realize you were involved in that component of it. That's awesome.
It was really fun. Paste had, I think that the best thing about Paste was, you're right, it was very forward looking. It was when we were sit down to do these editorial meetings about what we were going to cover or what tours we'd sponsor and things, the mantra of Paste of being focused on signs of life in music, film, and culture really came through and felt so authentic to what we were doing. It was amazing to work in that environment versus MTV, which was so numbers driven and, just chasing especially back then it was, Britney Spears kind of pop. That felt so manufactured compared to what we were doing at Paste. And Paste gave me such exposure to so many different sides of the music industry that informed a lot of what I would go on and do later in my career.
Yeah. No, I love that era. That was such a great time. Last time I saw you at Pace when I came down and visited the offices was right before you left to go to grad school. Can you talk a bit about that shift and pivot?
Yeah. So I told people I traded the Indies for the Ivy League, which was a strange transition. Awesome. So I was at Pace for 3 years full time and made the decision to go back and get my MBA. And in large part because of what I saw at Pace. And what I loved that Nick and Josh and Tim and Joe built was, seeing an idea come to life and then watching it grow into different iterations. And what I realized at that time in my career is if I ever had a big idea of my own, I wanted to make sure I had enough business education to take that idea to where it could go. And so I went to Harvard Business School, which traditionally attracts lots of Wall Street type consultants. I was definitely what they classified as a non-traditional student. They used that term politely, but it was strange to go to a school like that where they really didn't know the music industry. I was one of 2 students in a class of 900 that had worked in the music industry. So in some respects, I learned so much about business from people who were not in the music industry, right? The basics of financial reporting and investing and, raising money, things like that have paid off now in my career. But it also was a cool experience because everybody knew I was the music person. I thought, quite honestly, I was going to go to business school. I was going to get out of the music industry and go into tech, just traditional tech marketing. And while I was at Harvard, I realized there was something really powerful for my own career to be known for something like that. The other thing, too, I learned at Harvard and speaking to all my classmates was how lucky I was to have found a job in something I was passionate about. So many of my friends still really haven't figured out what their passion in work is and how to blend the two. And I didn't realize how rare and lucky that was for me at such a young age in my career, too, to have already been in a dream job situation. And so I ended up doubling down on music instead of getting out of it, which was the original intention when I went to Harvard.
Yeah. Well, that was probably a good time to do that because that was right, I would imagine, right around the beginning of a pretty massive shift in the music industry that opened up, additional opportunities, especially on the tech side. I mean, I was around a similar time frame, if I recall. That was when I was wrapping up my time at network management and stepping back out. And I had a similar sense, an epiphany where it's like, I need to do something that is more tech focused in a way beyond just, day-to-day type, artist management. And that's how I ended up, I think, following into a pretty great opportunity at Noise Trade. But talk a little bit about, or I'd love to hear more about, like, after you finished that process and got your MBA, how you ended up getting and marrying those passions and finding a path back into the music industry.
Well, you're right. It was a time, I'm remembering back now. I went to school in 2008. So it was right about when the iPhone came out. And the app ecosystem was very nascent. Like that was such a new thing, music apps. And this was the time too, when you're coming off of a lot of people being really scared about music tech because you had Groove Shark, you had, the blogs were driving so much of it. So much of it was kind of in that gray area of illegal downloading, but also like the industry loved it and supported it and sent music in. So it was a really funky time for the music industry, but it also was it was a bad time for the economy. It was 2008, the Great Recession, the recession of 2008. And one of the pivots I had to make was I went into business school thinking like, oh, I'm going to have like a safe corporate path now. Like recruiters are going to come to Harvard and look for interns. That summer, all the internships pretty much dried up if they weren't traditional paths like accounting or banking or, consulting. So jobs I had kind of hoped would come from going to a school like that really weren't there. And it was a moment for me to realize that there really isn't a safe path in any career. And I was remembering a speech that Jim Carrey gave, a commencement speech, where he talked about this observation with his father. His father he stayed in a really quote unquote safe career and got laid off and wished he had done something passionate. So that summer, when I really didn't have anything lined up, I said, well, I have to make my own opportunity. I'm going to have to hustle something out myself. And that's actually how I started kind of getting into band management, which led me to a music tech job, was starting to look around and see, well, what artists need help and how can I help them? And I connected with the Lighthouse and the Whaler, who had been featured on the Pace Sampler CD. Unbeknownst to me, they were friends with my sister. My sister thought I had something to do with that, and I actually had nothing to do with it. The editorial team discovered their song and put it on the sampler. But connected with those guys and saw an opportunity to help them, and that led into management. And from working with them, went down to South by Southwest, where I connected with the founder of Songkick and was hired to help Songkick with business development. And that was such a crash course in music tech because it was still so new and so much was happening, but it was a really exciting time and definitely not where I thought my career was going to take me, even just 2 years earlier.
Yeah, wow, that's fascinating. It's funny you mentioned a couple of things that jumped out I had not heard about in a long time. I totally forgot about Groove Shark and that whole debacle. And then when I think of a company like Songkick, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong here because you were in the thick of it, but I mean that seems to be kind of the same kind of predecessor to like a Bands in Town in the way that RDO was for, I don't know, Apple Music or Spotify in a way. It's like there's a whole like era of music tech that started out that was really solid and had good foundations and ideas that for whatever reason didn't win out and didn't evolve in a way that you might have hoped in some respects, but it paved the path and showed what could come out of those circumstances.
That's really true. And, I years later had to do a presentation in my job at Google about the evolution of music tech. And you start to see what a graveyard of companies got left behind. And that's natural, I think, in most tech things. There's iterations and tech gets better and some companies stay and go. But, I was thinking back to when I was at Songkick. I mean, the original kind of product for it was to scan your iTunes library and tell you what bands were coming to town based on that. And Bands in Town was one of the companies that we were competing against, and my job was to try to get more deals than them. There was another competitor though, and I honestly, for the life of me, can't remember the name of them. I spent so much time trying to beat this one company, and they, disappeared or got acquired. And it's just fascinating how much of that changes that quickly. I mean, back at that time, Last FM was really the big. Yeah, that was like the big partner we were trying to work with. Spotify hadn't come to America yet. I remember I worked for Songkick in London for a couple months, and I went over there and I could have access to Spotify while I was in Europe, but not in America. I mean, music tech changes so quickly, and ideas that, get really excited about change so much faster as technology's gotten better. But that was only 12 years ago? That's not that long.
No, it feels like a lifetime in some respects. I remember also being in England when I was at network management and playing with Spotify. I think the epiphany for me, having been an early iTunes user, was that the interface was exactly like iTunes. It's like it was like having iTunes in a cloud, which is what it was and still is. But it was fascinating to me that it was just that simple. And when I remember showing it to people when I came back to the States, because you could, mask your IP address.
I know. I did the same thing. I used to cross the shade.
Yeah, to keep it going. I remember showing it to some folks, and they were like, "Oh my God, this is it more so than digital downloads, which was a pretty big leap for the industry in the first place. I think it just opened up a whole different way of listening to music." I remember when I was at Network, Terry McBride was given a presentation about, and he was always at that time in his career very forward looking as well, and I think he really hit on something that still sticks in my mind. I think is very true. Is when the CD came along with a record or with a cassette, and God forbid an 8-track, which would stop in the middle of a song when you had to flip it. But nobody remembers that, right? You could skip ahead. You could basically program and create your own order of music. And I think that really historically is a big disruptor. The fact that you can have that control, I think as a listener, as a fan, really kind of predicated where we are now, where, we can sit and think of a song and pull it up and listen to it immediately. I mean, that's just such a quantum leap over, where I grew up, at least, and how I initially experienced music. And yeah, just that to get back to your point, the fact that the tech industry just kind of skyrocketed from right around the end of the early 2000s to where it's at now is fascinating. But there's been a lot of full circle there too, in a sense, with just the resurgence in vinyl, and I think fans needing some sort of kind of physical component to their fandom, which is hard to get.
100%. Yeah, and it's interesting. We have a lot of interns that come through here. I like to have, so much of my career was because of internships, so we always make that available. We had an intern who, well, first of all, our interns don't understand that you used to have to record songs off the radio on cassette tape and stuff. I'm like, you don't even know how easy you have it, kids.
Right.
But one of our interns brought up the point that, for her, music has become this free commodity, right? Like your playlists are hidden there. And I think what she said was, my whole life, my music has been hidden in my pocket where no one can see it. And for her, having vinyl on her shelf that she could show off to friends when they come into her dorm room really was the social currency. And that's what's been missing in digital. And I think that we're seeing people want to return to having a tactile experience with music, to read the liner notes, to get the art. It just says something different about you when you've invested in a record versus putting stuff on a playlist, right? Which anybody can do. And the two things live simultaneous and help each other. But had you asked me 5 years ago, 10 years ago, one, if vinyl would be a huge thing, and two, if I would dedicate my career to it, I would have thought you were nuts.
Yeah. I mean, it was definitely, a bit of an outlier for a while. I mean, it's clearly the best physical format for music. I mean, so I think it never completely died down in some respects, I think, for music fans. But the fact that it's the one that won out essentially on the physical component is endearing and exciting, because it has a historical relevance, in a way that no other format has, and it really kind of ignites all the emotions around music when you're holding it and listening to it, versus and actually being engaged with it. You got to flip the side, and really you can't be completely passive in a way that I think, quite honestly, streaming music, and to a large degree podcasting, has done too, where it's like, oh, I just put this on and I go and do something else. And in some respects that's fine, but having a little bit more engagement in that, I think, is really what drives people to continue to be fans.
It is. And, one of the things that attracted me to vinyl was the last couple of years I had been working at Google. I had a really amazing opportunity to go launch Google Music and then Google Play. And I was becoming a bit jaded that my job was to keep people looking down at their phones in this hunched over position, headphones in. It just says, like, don't talk to me, right? Like this singular experience. I was really feeling kind of the pinch to do something that was a bit more back towards, band management or live music or something. And what attracted me to vinyl was the idea that you gather around a record player, that a lot of people use it in their homes as a way to engage guests. And it just felt different. You're not looking down, you're kind of engaged with it. It is a very active listening experience, and also just that it's rewarding the artist's vision for an album. That the sense of an album has changed so much too versus singles. And Spotify and other streaming services drive so much based on singles, that going back to the album format was I don't know, there's something really romantic about that.
Yeah. One thing that just came to mind, which I'm sure you're probably experiencing in your role at Gold Rush, is records are getting shorter time frame wise. Songs are getting shorter. It's like there was a period, I think, in the CD era where it's like, oh, we can put 70, 80 minutes worth of music on here. So we're going to. And so many of the albums I pull up to listen to now, I'm realizing are in that 30 to 35-minute range, which works really well for two sides of vinyl, and that to me is really encouraging.
Yeah, the max we recommend for one side of vinyl is 21 minutes. And, I can't tell you how many clients are starting to do one-sided 12-inch records, that the album itself is under 25 minutes. They just need one side even, or looking at 10-inch records. 10-inch is hard because that format just doesn't sit well on shelves in record stores. It gets lost in the mix. But that's interesting. We don't get a lot of records anymore that have 7 or 8-minute songs, or even gapless playback isn't really a thing for a lot of artists. It is driven so much by the streaming format and by singles.
Yeah. It's interesting. Over time, all those things seem to factor in to the art in some capacity, which is really fascinating to me and interesting. So I know we kind of skipped ahead a little bit into your current role in launching Gold Rush Vinyl, but how did you end up there specifically, and how did that kind of relate to your experiences on the artist management front?
Had I not been managing bands, Gold Rush Vinyl would not be here. And in part because, so after grad school, I started managing bands. I did that for about 7 years while simultaneously working at Songkick and then at Google. And when Google recruited me, one of the things that we talked about was they wanted me to keep management going in some small capacity, because it gave me real, on the ground view of the music industry. And the kind of the expertise that then I could bring into conversations and say, is this going to fly with musicians and band managers, was valuable. So I was kind of doing this parallel career path thing. And when I felt like I had achieved everything I wanted to achieve at Google, I started looking more towards, okay, am I going to be a full-time band manager? And can I take the leap to do that? And the artists I was working with are so talented, and I felt confident that I could go do that full-time. But one of the things that kind of kept nagging at me was, while I was managing, I'd be working a merch table occasionally, and I was shocked how many young kids were asking for vinyl, and how I'd kind of just question them and say, do you even own a record player? And they'd say, no, I want the band to sign the vinyl, or I want to take a picture with it. But vinyl was becoming a bigger piece of the marketing plan for each album. And I discovered how hard it is to get made. I think, the story that I tell a lot is the Family Crest had a really tremendous opportunity. Bob Boylan at NPR kind of found the record, declared that they were his favorite new band of the year, which is wonderful. They got a tiny desk performance, and we were managing kind of that trajectory. And they got offered a support slot on a bigger tour. And for a 7-person band and the guarantees to be a supporting act on a tour like that, you're not getting paid a lot as guaranteed, but the merch upside could be really good.
Right.
So we tried to get more vinyl made. And we're basically told, you're not going to get it in time. There's no way you're going to get it in 3 months. And I thought, my naivete about vinyl, that's crazy. I'll pay you more. Do a rush order. And no one would take the order. And I thought, oh, this is crazy. And, it just kept getting delayed and delayed and delayed. And it was that experience that kind of turned me on to vinyl and said, one, I can see how important this is to a musician's career, because I can see the royalties that they are getting from streaming versus when you get the cash in your pocket from selling vinyl on the road. And I started to understand that economically, vinyl has become so critical to musicians' careers. And then seeing that it was an industry that really had come to life again and hadn't had a lot of new blood in it, and started to get really fascinated by the space. So while I thought I was going to go do full-time band management, I looked instead and said, well, maybe it's vinyl. Maybe that's where I go.
Wow. So how'd you end up in Austin? And I imagine the leap to start that would be because it's it's a physical format, and you have to have a machine to make that. And kind of circling back around, I guess, to your MBA and Harvard experience, how do you pull a plan together to launch an endeavor like that? Because obviously you see the need, you had the need personally, you probably saw the potential for it, but how do you actually take that from a need and an idea into something that's practical and actually a business.
It was really bonkers, quite honestly. And I look back on it now and I'm like, I can't believe I pulled that off. Like that just happened so quickly. So I sat down one afternoon. I remember I was in San Francisco at the time. I sat down one afternoon and I started mocking out a business model for what would become Gold Rush Vinyl. And it was more like just because it had been on the back of my mind for so long, the vinyl thing. And I had a free afternoon. I was like, let me see what this would look like if I really took a stab at it. And so I started building basically a business proposal for Gold Rush Vinyl. And I ran it by a couple of people and they said, yeah, I think that there's something here. And honestly, just out of curiosity, I found out that Wells Fargo was a big SBA lender for businesses. And because this is a business with equipment, I qualified for loans that, I didn't have to go out and raise venture capital and things like that. So I set an appointment with Wells Fargo in San Francisco, and they basically, after the end of the meeting, told me they'd give me the loan. And it happened that fast. It was like one meeting with their VP of business development at Wells Fargo's headquarters downtown San Francisco. And because I had the MBA, because I'd worked at Google, I had the band management experience, they said, okay, well, this is an industry we don't traditionally invest in, but you seem to know what you're doing. And I remember I walked out of that meeting and I called my family and I was like, I think I have to start a factory now. I think that's what I just signed up for. So, obviously a lot went into that. I mean, I had all these experiences that lent itself to that business plan, but it didn't feel impossible. And that I just, how I got to Austin was I took that same business plan and I went down to Austin. A friend here, Michael Pfefferman, who I'd worked with when he was at C3 and doing Austin City Limits and Lollapalooza, he and I had connected during the Pace days, and I had run into him at South by Southwest, and he had told me, if you ever think about doing your own music business, you need to come down to Austin because the mayor here really has made a commitment to making music business a bigger part of the city's economy. And so when Gold Rush looked like it might be a real thing, I went down to Austin at his advice. I met with the City of Austin economic development team and the Texas Music Office, which is the division of the state of Texas's economic development team that works on music business. And they both those offices gave me the confidence that if I came down here, if I moved my life here, if I built a factory here, I'd have the support of the city and the state. They even had me go meet the governor of Texas, which I thought was insane. Like, this is a vinyl record factory. But they really were committed to making music business in Austin a bigger thing. And so it felt like every door was kind of flinging open. I loved the fact that it was centrally located for, shipping purposes, that so many bands come through here, that the music scene in Austin was already, a big market that we could address. And so, yeah, it happened so fast. I ended up moving down here in April of 2017 and started working on Gold Rush Vinyl.
Wow. Yeah, that's such a fascinating story. I don't think, it's the perfect, to your point, combination of all your experiences. Like if you hadn't gotten that MBA, you might not have been able to kind of piece together what it would have taken to kind of get that loan to launch it. And if you didn't have obviously the management experience, you wouldn't have even saw the need in the first place. And I also love this, I'm sure this isn't lost on you, is you went from, basically spearheading and rolling out a digital product, and now you're creating a physical product, in a way. It's, there's so many nice parallels and juxtapositions there.
Yeah. And you know what, people did think I was nuts. They're like, you're going to leave Google. Why are you going to leave Google? And one thing I learned is, and this kind of is the same beat that I had in my head after business school, is like, there really is no such thing as a safe thing, right? Google was an amazing company to work for. And I learned so much. I had such good managers there. I learned so much about how to be a better boss. And I still call on those experiences, but it wasn't the right fit for me. I love making physical products and sending them out the door. It feels very satisfying. There's obviously, there were a lot of bumps in the road because as much as, I felt like I had the right idea for Gold Rush, like I didn't know how expensive it was going to be to start this thing. I didn't know how much more money we were going to need than the bank loan. We make a lot of mistakes all the time, and it feels nice to be doing work that I can see how it's helping musicians in a very immediate way, and to be part of that with them too, where the vinyl record is, the culmination of all of this work that went into a record, and to watch the clients come here and pick it up and like see their record and be a part of that is really, really rewarding. And, for me too, management was wonderful, but it also, I was looking ahead to what I wanted to have in my personal life and a family and kids one day, and feeling like I don't know that I have what it takes to get my bands to the next level. Like I don't have quite the experience that other managers do, and it's better to let them find the managers that are going to help them kind of go beyond where I've taken them and allow me the space in my life to not have to be at shows all the time or be on the road and be on call 24 hours a day. It just personally wasn't the right fit for me anymore. So, this job is very different, but was totally informed by those band management experiences. And I'm so grateful that those clients let me help them in their careers for so long that I could have this new dream.
Yeah. And so I assume, you're dealing with labels, but you're probably dealing with a lot of artists and a lot of managers as well. And I'm sure all that is informative as well, in your current space. Because it is probably, it's vinyl is still a little bit of a, mystery, I think, for a lot of people as far as how it's made and what goes into it and whatnot. So I'm sure just being able to understand the artist and manager perspective when you're dealing with those components, that probably comes into play too.
It does, yeah. And, we're a unique plant because we mostly deal with independent artists and managers. And I think that's because the value proposition we built here, which was a fast turnaround, is understood by managers. In a way, it's not necessarily by labels. I think labels obviously want fast turnaround, but they've gotten away with having long lead times on projects for years now. So
right.
It's not as immediate as when a manager calls me and says, "Oh my gosh, we just got this amazing opportunity and we need vinyl ASAP." That I understand that because I've been in that situation. So we tend to do most of our work with independent artists and managers and independent labels that are moving a bit more nimbly than a big major label would.
Yeah, that's a as you said, it's a huge niche to kind of fill, considering it was kind of not really an option.
Yeah, and I think about, I don't know, it's probably changed a bit, but I'd say maybe 75% of our customers have never pressed vinyl, or if they have, it was years ago.
Oh,
so
wow.
We're constantly in education mode and trying to help our artists understand the trade-offs of what they want to do with vinyl or the options in front of them. And using a vocabulary, the vinyl industry is really complicated and confusing, and there's tons of things that can go wrong in any pressing. But it's also kind of an intimidating industry because the terminology that's used is not very familiar to people. So I think a lot of what my staff do is kind of walk people through the project, educate them on what is going to go into making the record so that they understand when things go wrong or there's a hang up, like why that is, and just kind of there's so many pieces that go into some people come into the factory all the time and they're like, this is like Willy Wonka's factory. It's just crazy to watch it all being made. And that helps then if they can see it and be like, oh, okay, I understand now when you explain these different pieces of the process.
What trends in vinyl are you seeing in a short period of time? It's been, 3 years since you guys kind of launched. It still feels like it's evolving in some respects. It's picking up, it's becoming more popular. But, my mind kind of goes to a place where I know I was speaking to somebody at an independent label where, a few years ago, they kind of moved away from including digital download cards in vinyl because, people were buying it for different reasons and never redeeming. It just feels to me like there's still some evolution in that process, even though it's an old format.
It is. And gosh, we hate stuffing digital download cards. Everybody stop doing that, please. Just
right,
like more waste. Yeah. More people are realizing that vinyl is a profitable medium for them, that it's popular, that it's, it's not as intimidating as it used to be to get into it. Where I'm seeing, a couple trends that I'm seeing. One is just how much it's growing. And we're measuring that in terms of the purchase orders we get. I can't tell you how many purchase orders came in during COVID that started at, let's say, 500 units. And the band or the manager called and said, actually, we sold through that so fast, we need 2,000. Or, we started at 1,000 and now we have 7,000. Like the order sizes are going up a lot. And with that, what's happening is I think managers are driving a lot of this, but our clients are starting to get more savvy about segmenting their fan bases and realizing that not all fans are created equal. You're going to have some fans that really want a super special edition copy and have a willingness to pay for a $50 version of vinyl that has all the bells and whistles and inserts and download cards and posters, special edition colors. That's a big piece of what I'm seeing is people kind of breaking up the fan base and saying, okay, we have these super fans that will buy vinyl. Some are going to be, casual in their listening. They're going to care more about the art, and some are really going to care about the audio, and some are going to want the special variant, and some are going to want black, and starting to break up the fan base that way and treat vinyl as this kind of memorabilia piece. So the growth of that. And then, one trend I'm trying to keep an eye on is what happens because of digital. Like, we make 7-inch records here. Not very many plants in the US do 7-inch, but part of that was because I saw that Spotify and, the other streaming services, Apple Music, YouTube, really incentivize singles to be what you put your focus on. And so we wanted to be ready for that in case people do start moving away from albums and start doing more singles, that we have 7 inches ready and available. So that's some trends. The last trend I'd point to is bundling. We're starting to get a lot of inquiries about 7 inches or 12 inches that will get bundled with other products, and not just merch like t-shirts, but like whiskey or, coffee. It's interesting to see how people are trying to pair up different lifestyle products together with vinyl.
Yeah, that's fascinating, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I definitely seen the different colorways component, and know a lot of fans that'll buy all of them just to have, completist kind of mindset. But the pairing and bundling is a great way to kind of evolve beyond just the physical music format.
Yeah, and it is true. I mean, the super fans will, there's some pride in having all of them, collect them all kind of thing happening. And, we're starting to hear more and more ideas from artists saying, like, is that possible? What could we do? Could we do a golden ticket kind of thing where there's only one of these records available, and encourage fans to engage with each other in trading online, or, things of that nature. It's fun. I think one thing that with the pandemic that's been interesting is that the old rule book for the music industry really doesn't apply anymore. It's forcing, I think it's forcing labels in particular to look at artists' careers differently, rather than just sticking them in the system and seeing how it churns out a star or not. It's trying to be more specific to, the artist's needs, the fan bases. I think in all, that's a kind of silver lining piece of this, is that we're going to see a lot more creativity come out of campaigns as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah. I tend to go there too. I mean, we were talking earlier about how it's hard to sometimes, it's a very up and down period, I think right now for a lot of people. But, as this thing kind of continues on, I think it is important to stop for a minute and go, well, what are some of the good benefits that are going to come out of this that'll, carry on beyond it, that will shape whatever's next. And it's sometimes hard in the moment to identify those, but I think it's important that we kind of try to take that into context in a lot of ways. I mean, yeah, without a doubt, going back to what you're saying earlier, and I know things have been disruptive with like Record Store Day and people not being able to go and purchase things as readily, or at least go and experience flipping through vinyl at a store. I think that's probably offset just by the desire to engage with an artist directly in some fashion, which I can't do right now with live performance.
It is I'm glad you bring that up. It's a really beautiful thing to see fans rallying behind their favorite artists. And one of the things I saw as a manager that informed why I wanted to do vinyl is I think fans just inherently understand if you buy merch, that money goes in the pocket of the artist. And fans clamoring for merch, or, when a new product comes available, there does seem to be this understanding of that's how you're going to keep your favorite artist working and creating. And that's been wonderful to watch, is how many fans are showing up and buying products to help musicians during this difficult time. Yeah,
definitely. And circling back to some of the things we were talking about earlier too, and talking about singles, how digital is kind of a singles driven component. I mean, I think for artists, I think just to have a validation. I mean, I guess in some respects, hearing your song on the radio used to be that validation, maybe, a
Yeah.
generation ago, and maybe seeing your song on a playlist can kind of fill that void. But I don't think anything as invigorating and visceral as seeing your music in a physical format, and obviously a
Yes.
record, whether it's a 7-inch or 12-inch vinyl or whatever. It just, it's the whole package and the whole thing, and it's a way you can share your music with fans, in a way that's really meaningful.
I'm really glad you bring that up because it is a validating thing. And it is, I think, in part because it is so easy to put any music online now, that it has become so democratized in terms of distribution that we hear
Mm-hmm.
clients say to us, well, this means we're a real band now because we have vinyl, we have merch,
Yeah.
And one of the things too that we've heard, and this is, I never really considered the whole of what happens when the vinyl leaves here and goes out into the world. But a lot of the festival booking agents and people responsible for career defining opportunities will look at whether you have merch or not as a mark of, are you really serious about your career? There are a lot of artists that come around that might have a lot of success on SoundCloud or Spotify or had a song on the radio, but are you a flash in the pan? Is that just because this one song went viral? Are you really serious about your career? Are you a bedroom, star just making tapes to put up on SoundCloud? The idea that merch is kind of this defining thing that says, yes, I am a serious musician. I hadn't considered that before until I heard it from a couple booking agents that has become a consideration.
Wow. Yeah, that's awesome. I had the same kind of epiphany when I started working at Ambient Inks on the merch side, where to me, it felt full circle for me in my career too. And what I loved as a music fan and as a manager, it just made me realize that, and it came from what you were mentioning earlier too, like working the merch booth when you're on the road with an artist. It's like anybody that buys something physical, whether it's a t-shirt or a record, they're not doing that because it's, I like the feel of this, or I like that design. They're buying it from an emotional connection point. And that's such a huge thing, in a passive environment we have of streaming everything now,
Mm-hmm.
video, audio, whatever, reading news, on our phones. I mean, I think there's nothing more flattering from an artistic perspective than somebody going above and beyond and spending and paying a premium for something that they don't necessarily need to in a way. I mean, that's an emotional connection that you can't replace.
Oh, of course. You're making me think of so many times I went to shows and the line for merch was too long. And in my head at the show, I said, that's okay, I'll just buy it online tomorrow. And then never did. Because when you're in the show, when you're leaving a show, or you're having whatever kind of emotionally driven moment with music, that's your thinking is so different. And then I go home and look and I'm like, $35 for a white t-shirt with just black text on it. No, thank you. But I would have spent that money, take my money at the show. It's really interesting how to try to catch people in that moment and to make the most of it.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging. But if you get a fan to that point, they're pretty much a fan for life. There's not too many people. It's a very small percentage of people who are throwing that kind of cash around, I think, at this point in artist careers, unless they're really emotionally invested.
Mm-hmm. And the data piece, I mean, I forgot about the noise trade period of working with you and seeing what you all built there. But that was such an early predecessor to all of this data mining, right? Of who are the fans? How do we keep in touch with them, segment them, find the right fans at the right time to invite them into these experiences. And, on the vinyl side, we're getting a lot more calls from companies that are recognizing, okay, we've identified who the super fans are that might want vinyl, and how do we get them something special like a limited edition record or what have you. It's neat to see kind of all of those things coming together. And now that we have a little bit more time on our hands, right, with not being on the road or seeing shows so much, I'm excited to see what's going to come out of that creatively and from a data perspective.
Yeah, you're right. You can begin to connect the dots there that otherwise might just be, barely touched on in passing. So that's great. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation. I did have a few just lightning round questions.
Yeah,
the first one is so poignant, obviously, in our discussion. But what was the first album that was meaningful to you that you ever bought?
Ooh, CD or vinyl?
I guess it really could be either because it's really about that emotional connection we were talking about.
Yeah, the first record that really I just started to fall in love with music was the Beatles anthology. And part of it was because I'm such a super Beatles fan. I have such a, strong family connection to that music. But because I was born after John Lennon died, I'd never heard a new Beatles song. I'd never been a Beatles fan who could at the same time as everyone else hear a new Beatles song. And when they put out the 2 tracks, Free as a Bird and Real Love, that came on the anthology, it was really special for me to get that album and to hear quote unquote new Beatles music for the first time, just like everybody else. So that was a really important one for me when I was young.
Wow, no, that's fascinating. So I heard a friend of mine was a record collector, and he was buying a bunch of bootlegs on CD back in the day, like in the mid '80s, mid to late '80s, as the CD format started to take hold. And I heard the White Album, the demos for the White Album, before I ever heard the White Album.
Whoa.
Which was really interesting, and I fell in love with those recordings. So when I finally heard the fleshed out record, it was pretty jarring in a way.
I bet it was. Yeah, that's an album too. That's jam packed. Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's a classic record, but it was really I just remembered it. Actually, I hadn't thought about this until now, but in some ways, it's informed probably the thing I loved most about management. And I still manage an artist I work with has been sending me songs because he's working on a record. And there's just nothing like hearing something for the first time from somebody that you care about, that is putting time and energy in crafting something. And that you're one of a handful of people maybe has heard this. It's just like that connection point is just like I don't know. I don't know. That's probably what keeps me doing artist management more than anything else. Like, I don't know if I could step away from that without having it. A lot of it probably goes back to just the intimacy of hearing something in that kind of something of that classic as the White Album in that, phase of actual demos and then eventually experiencing the record.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that if you, as a manager, because I loved getting demos, but do you ever love the demo more and then you're disappointed by the studio recording? Like, I fell so in love with demos because you have them for so long before the record's made.
Right. Yeah. Demoitis, I think is what they call it. Yeah, that happens a lot. When I was managing Josh Rouse, that was one of the things that I really loved engaging with his fan base on. And thankfully Josh was very generous and open to me doing this. But as a fan, first and foremost, being able to start that Bedroom Classics archive that we did and pulling a bunch of these demos and live recordings out was a lot of fun for me because I got to share a lot about that experience and share that with a fan, in a way that they wouldn't have normally had a chance to engage with that. So, yeah, I mean, I think to answer your question, I've come back around to where, yes, I think if you really press me, there's probably some demos I like more than the finished recordings. I just see it as two different performances almost, or two different like flavors of that particular song. But yeah, it's hard not to fall in love with whatever you make that initial emotional connection with. And that becomes more of the definitive, maybe personal version of that, even if it's not necessarily the best version. Yeah, that's really interesting. So in the same sense, what was the first concert you attended?
My first concert was the Monkees reunion tour with my family when I was a kid, because I loved that TV show and I loved the Brady Bunch. That was my first show. And then the first show that really also meant, the second show, I guess, but the first one where I was like, oh, this is a band I chose to go see was the Foo Fighters were playing a promo concert in the parking lot of Tower Records for Color and Shape. And my dad walked me down there because I was too young to go by myself. And that was really special.
Wow. Yeah, those are good memories for sure. I added this question in during the pandemic because unfortunately it's just a reality that we're in. But what was the last show you went to?
The last ticketed show I went to was the Austin Music Awards. And I remember it was just about when they were deciding if South by was going to be canceled or not. And there was just this tension in the air and no one wanted to get too close to each other. And it felt like a very strange celebration, and that was the last ticketed show I went to.
Wow. Yeah, that was really, yeah, that was kind of the apex. I think South by, certainly for the industry, but I would say culturally to a large degree, that was the first like major convention, international convention that was like, nope, can't do it, not going to happen. And then the reality set in of, wow, this is really going to change how we perceive things and engage. And then I think the next cultural touch point was when the NBA obviously made their decision. I think that was the broader one where it was like, whoa, wait a minute, this is really serious. But I can't imagine being in that room under those circumstances with the heaviness of what that was to probably so many people there, the city and the, musicians and obviously the organization as a whole. That was a tough decision for sure.
And, I remember the mayor getting up and making a really bad joke about, let's all raise our glasses, but not share our drinks. And I just was like, dude, you're about to cancel South by Southwest. Like, this is not the time for jokes. No. This feels awkward.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh my gosh. Wow. Oh, well, thanks for sharing that. Just a couple more. So can you think of something, and this is, I can't ever answer this question very easily myself, but obviously you're listening to a lot of music that comes through. Is there something that's really just captured you and your attention lately that you really love that you could share and mention?
I'm absolutely obsessed with Caroline Polachek's album. She was previously in Chairlift. We've had the pleasure of pressing that record a couple times over now, and I cannot get enough of it. I always joke with my staff, I'm like disappointed I haven't been like marked as one of the top 1% fans on Spotify, because I'm like, who's listening to this more than I am? But that's a really special record that I've been listening to a lot.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one to come back to in a way. She strikes me as somebody that a record or two from now or a few years, people are going to kind of come back to and go, where was I in this? Like,
was I sleeping on this?
Yeah. There seems to be that kind of vibe to her for sure. Cool. Well, one final question. Cause as I get older, I realize, it's not all just about music. What brings you joy outside of, obviously what you get to do at Gold Rush and music in general? Like what's your escape, I guess, from that?
I love film a lot. And one of the, when I worked at Google, I had to commute down on the bus to and from every day. I had about 3 hours of time on a bus. And one of the hobbies I picked up was writing screenplays and reading screenplays. I love finding screenplays on the internet, reading how the director and the writer thought about scenes. I think it's fascinating. I miss movie theater so much. You and I talked a little bit about this offline, but man, I'd miss just going to see a movie and immersing myself in story that way. So I get a lot of joy out of that. And I think I've pretty much exhausted Netflix at this point in the pandemic. I've seen everything there is to see. So I'm always taking new movie recommendations that might be hidden gems.
Yeah, I think when we could talk another hour about the struggles and scary moments of how live music will, move forward. But I think the film industry is going to be faced with the same. I mean, I've had the pleasure, and I'm sure you might have bounced into this too in your career. It's like when you're around the film industry, it's like you just add, 3 or 4 zeros to every figure you're dealing with, I mean, it's just exponentially more risky and more expensive. And, as hard as it is on music venues right now, I mean, film, it's just, when I was teaching, I did a whole class and lecture on, trying to find your popcorn. Like that's what the music industry, theater industry really lives off of. It's the peripheral component. And the way my analogy to that was, you're not selling your art. That's just bringing people in. Is how you engage with them and what you decide to do beyond that really is probably going to drive your business. But when I think about the film and theater industry in particular, it's like, how do you, in a pandemic or coming out of a pandemic, how do we get to a place where you can get people? And the only reason you'd go to see a movie now is for that like physical shared. Well, I shouldn't say the only reason. One of the main reasons is to go and have that shared experience. And you can't, I mean, how are you going to be able to, replicate that or do that safely, at least in the short term? I mean, it's, I think music will find its way through. I think promoters and venues will, come out of this okay in some capacities, but I really worry about how local theaters and even the big theater chains are going to weather the change in coming out of the pandemic and what that means to going to see movies.
Yeah. And you know what, though? I mean, if ever there was a time where stories need to be told, it's going to be after this, right? And I keep
Right.
thinking, like, what amazing albums and films are going to get made because of what we're experiencing. And the ability that we can all relate to this shared experience is going to be something very different than we've seen before. So, yeah, I hope all of those industries pull through, but it's given me a newfound appreciation for the ability to go to a theater or to go to a show. And I'm at least grateful to be reminded that that is such a gift to have those outlets.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a good positive way to look at it, because you're probably right. When things do normalize into a place, maybe it's lesser capacity, or maybe, you're not sitting on top of each other in a theater. But the reality of it is there'll be a thirst for that and a desire to get out of the house and kind of reconnect with that. So there is an eventual positive component to that, but it's just, missing that now for me, and it sounds like for you too, is just a real touch point in the realities that we're in. So awesome. Well, thank you so much for all this.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I always look forward to any reason to connect with you.
Many thanks to Caren for her insights and perspectives today. If you're so inclined, please rate us, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Tough Love Pod. That's TOUHLOVPOD. And above all, share this podcast with your friends and fellow music industry and artist communities. It takes a village. You can reach us at chris@anhedoniamanagement.com. That's CHRIS at ANHEDONIAMGMT.com. Be well, trip up, get back up, and let's all learn as we go. Until next time.